Welcome to the Wealth Effect. Today we have Dr. Kimberly with us. She has an impressive amount of accomplishments. She has served as commissioned officer in the United States Public Health Service, a dental school professor, a clinical dentist with her late husband Jim in Farmington, uh, Minnesota, a school board chair, president of an international women's organization, vice chair of of the Union Gospel Mission Board, the first woman president in Minnesota's Dental Association, a, and a national spokesperson for the American Dental Association. Then she became a grief counselor, a civil meditator, a death doula, a life coach, an award winning best selling author, and an international speaker on the topics of grief, conflict, and legacy planning. Wow, that is very impressive. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm old. When you have a lot of time, you could do a lot of things. So
I guess we could start at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and was it a small town, or how was it?
actually, I grew up. My father was in the Navy, so I went all
Oh,
around the country. I was born in California, went to Florida. We were all over. But I grew up mainly. He was stationed at the Pentagon, so most of my life from first grade onward was in Maryland, in the DC suburbs.
wow, that's very different. I did not expect that. Never really heard anyone growing up around those areas. Do
Yeah.
you think that influenced like your dreams of what you wanted to become if you wanted to join Navy or go a different route?
Well, I did end up being a member of the public health service, but what influenced me most was my first week at school. I was just 17, and I was at the University of Maryland, and there was this really cute guy named Jim Harms, and he wanted to be a dentist. And so I thought, this was the 70s. Forgive me, this don't do this anyone now. This is very old thinking. But I thought, if I became a dentist, he would marry me maybe. And so I did, and I did, and he did, and so it all worked out. My plan worked great, and I ended up loving dentistry. There were very few women in those days, but it's about half the graduating class now is women. So it was, although it was unusual then, it certainly isn't anymore.
How was it financing or going to college at those times? Did you have to pay out of pocket or was it more affordable back
I
then?
Yeah, it was much more affordable. I worked three jobs,
Or-
and I paid for my all my education, my living expenses, everything out of those three jobs. So I was lucky because I was in Washington. I got a junior fellowship with the Department of Agriculture, which paid $4.50 an hour. But then I worked at McDonald's, which was $1.50, and then I had another job as an accountant, which, and I'm not really a good accountant, but it was a small construction firm, had me come in and do some bookkeeping. And then I worked in the evolution lab. Actually, I had four jobs, I guess. I worked at the evolution lab at the University of Maryland. So I just worked a lot and paid for my education. But the wonderful thing back then is, like, I was probably working maybe 40 hours a week and going to school about the same. I was working very hard, but I was able to pay my tuition because it was less then. Tuition has skyrocketed, so it makes it much more difficult now. But I didn't even go into debt, and I got no loans, or my parents wouldn't fill out any forms, so I didn't get any loans or any other help. But I was able to do it by working, which I don't think is really possible anymore because the costs have gone up so much.
Yeah, it's very difficult without scholarships or external help. How did you manage your stress? Because that's a lot. I didn't have a traditional job in college just because I had enough scholarships and I just needed to maintain a really high GPA.
Well, it was what I had to do. And I think that when you're faced with the situation, and I wanted to go to college, that if I wanted to go to college, I had to make my way through and work my way through. And I think that really helped it. But yeah, I did not have really much free time. And I think that's how I started dating my husband, Jim. He was also working his way through college. And so our dates were usually at the library. So I think we just combined some things because we were both very busy and we're both working really hard.
And how was it uh, transitioning from college to practicing dentist?
Well, it was, when I got to dental school, I have to say I got a public health service scholarship. And that was wonderful because that took care of the transition. Because when I got out of dental school, my husband also had a public health scholarship. We got out of dental school, we were sent. to a location in Illinois, an underserved area. It's called the National Health Service Corps, which is part of the Coast Guard. And so we were sent there. We did a little externship at the Coast Guard base in California. So we were kind of given, we were given our instructions right after dental school, practice for 3 years, worked off our obligation, and then we went on to buy our own practice a few years later in
Wow, that's
Minnesota.
pretty interesting. How did you go about opening your own practice? Did you feel overwhelmed because you didn't like particularly study business?
That's true. We purchased an existing practice,
Mm.
and the dentist that was working there stayed for about 3 months, kind of with the transition, and we just took over. And that's a very typical. In fact, my daughter is a dental attorney. That's what she helps people do, is to transition from being an associate or usually, most people don't come right out of dental school and buy a practice because they need to have a little work experience under their belt typically to get a loan. But they work as an associate with someone and then they go on and buy the practice, either the one that they're in or perhaps a different practice. But that's kind of the way things are going.
And then how did you feel like having a higher income from being a dentist? Did you feel more free as money does buy some luxuries, being able to travel, being able to do a lot more things, especially coming from your background with having so many jobs?
Well, my husband was a farmer. He grew up on a farm, and what we did is we put the money in the barn, is that what he liked to say, and we put our money, we invested back into the practice. We bought a beautiful building. We actually managed to have a very large practice eventually, and we were in a small town, and that was wonderful. It was a great place to raise our kids. It was a small town in Minnesota, so we didn't feel quite the pressure. Growing up on the East Coast, I felt a little more pressure to make money. Growing up in the Midwest, we didn't feel quite as much pressure. And so therefore I was able to participate on the school board and as in organized dentistry as president of the dental association. So I was able to do all more of those things. We had a really good lifestyle. I don't think we didn't feel like we were super rich, and we invested a lot in our children's education. We paid for their college tuition, and then when they went on to law school, we said we'd pay their tuition, but they could live at home if they wanted because they went to local law schools in Minneapolis. But they chose not to, and they went into student debt. So they could really talk to you a little bit about maybe they would have changed that decision if they had thought about it. They would have probably stayed at home and not had the student debt. But you make decisions when you're 21 and 22 that can affect the rest of your life.
Yeah. How did you go about managing, like planning all this? Did you figure it out on your own or did you go seek out help in any way?
Well, I think for me, and again, my husband and I, because we had to work our way through school, we knew the value of a dollar. We knew how hard it was to make it. And so we were fairly frugal. We took vacations. We felt that travel was a really important thing for our family. We kind of focused on experiences with the family. We had a very nice home, but it wasn't really extravagant. It was a very nice one in our community. And I think that the motto that we really lived by was we lived below our means, and we did invest in retirement, and that was a really smart move because when I was 54, I developed nerve damage in my drilling fingers, and there went my career. I was working full time one day, and then I was done the next, and that was a shock because we were planning on using those years, 50 to 60, to really save up for our retirement plan. But because we had planned early, lived low, lower than we needed to. We really weren't living low, but we were living lower than we could have lived. I was able to retire at 54, and then that's when I started working with the grief counseling and civil mediation and those things, which I just love to do. And so I had to reconstruct myself, as we do quite frequently in life. And then when I lost my husband and became a widow, then you have to reconstruct yourself again. So the probably the best advice I can give on just living a life when it comes to money is to live below your means for as long as you can, but take some trips. Don't remember that your legacy is being built every day with the people that you're around, with the children. do some fun things with the kids, spend money on that, spend money on education for the kids. Because one of the wonderful things I found out is that both my kids are attorneys, are both successful. I don't I don't need to help them anymore. And in fact, they said, "Mom, don't save your money up for us. We're fine. You can use it to fund your retirement. Don't save it up for us." And that gave me the freedom really to do the things I'm doing now because I love writing. I talk about grief and conflict and things like that. And I just have a great time speaking and writing books and kind of being with my grandchildren. I have a place here in Kansas City, and then I also have a place in Minneapolis because I have three grandchildren here and three grandchildren there. And I have not forgotten my most important job, and that is to be a good granny to those little grandchildren of mine. And so I want to be part of both sets of grandchildren. I want to be part of their lives on a day-to-day basis. And that's where you get your, I really think emotional wealth. That's where you are. I feel very emotionally wealthy, and I have these wonderful grandchildren that I'm trying to teach them how to become resilient and how to get through life. Because one generation we pass that on to the next. Life's not easy. It's kind of hard. So you got to teach some of these lessons.
Yeah, especially nowadays where things are coming up at earlier and earlier stages, especially with media. Things like wars are becoming more known to younger children, and it becomes a point of like, do you talk to them about like death in that sense? Because they're going to come across it, whether it is in their personal life or the media in the outside world. Would you go about that? Like talking to someone that's younger, let's say like under 15, talking about like death or their aging parent? Because I know even for me, I find talking about death about a family member very uncomfortable and hard to even bring up because my mom is like 53 and I would say on the younger side, but I know it will come one day.
Well, I'm 68, so I'm a little older than your mother. And what is it's so critically important. It's so critically important to build resilience. And when I lost my husband 5 years ago, my grandchildren were very close to him. Fortunately, he was able to meet all of them, and they all remember him. And I keep his memory alive. But through pictures, I take lots of pictures, and we take trips and we talk about him quite a bit. But when he died, I saw the effect it had on my children. It was really hard. They were just devastated. It took them a long time to recover. And my legacy to them is that even though I know they love me and hopefully they'll love me a lot, but I want them to realize that the best thing they can do for me is to flourish and to thrive. And I know there'll be some grief over losing me, but I want them to remember the things that I taught them. And I work really hard to teach them how to love people, how to be kind, how to be have some resilience in their lives. So I try to really focus on that now. And I do talk to them about when I die. I'll say, you know what, at some point, Nana, Nana's going to die. I'm going to die. And you need to go on and you need to have a great life. And I want to see you have a great life. And I know it works because just a few months ago, my little 8-year-old granddaughter, Heidi, looked up at me from the dinner table and she was really kind of, a little nervous about asking this question. She said, "Nana," and I said, "Yeah, Heidi." She goes, "Well, if what happened to Pop Pop happens to you," and I said, "You mean if I were to die?" And she said, "Yeah, Nana, if you were to die." And I said, "Go ahead, Heidi, if I were to die, what question do you have?" She said, "Well, if you were to die, we still go on the Disney cruise." And I said, "Yes, yes, you can go on the Disney cruise. And by the way, that's a great idea. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting money aside from in my will, to cover a trip for my family, for my whole family, going on a trip to remember me and to be happy, to remember that I want them to be joyful. I want them to have a good life. My time on earth would be done at that point, but I want them to have a good life and flourish and go forward. And that's one of the best legacies we can give to our families. And you mentioned not wanting to talk to your family about what happens when they die, and that can be a problem because what happens in our country, in the United States, 75% of families go through conflict surrounding the death of a loved one. And that's not a good time to be in conflict because you're overcome with grief at the same time, right? Just a bad combination. Things flare up. People don't talk to each other for the rest of their lives. They get angry. And it's important to talk to your parent to find out What are their wishes? Do they have a healthcare directive? And one of the best gifts you can give to your families is to fill out a healthcare directive. My husband did that for me. And he said, absolutely, positively, I do not want to go to the hospital. Keep me at home. I don't want to be intubated. I don't want to be resuscitated. I want, if when my time comes, I want my time to come and I want it to come at home. And he was really clear. He wrote it down, he signed it, it was officiated. And so when that time did come, there wasn't any question because you have questions when somebody is sick and you're their caretaker. What you want to do is get them better, right? You want to get them to the hospital and get them better. And that's your reaction. That's what you want to do. That was not what my husband wanted me to do because the last time he was in the hospital, he really wasn't getting better. So he realized that he wanted to die at home. And by having that form filled out, you give a tremendous gift to whoever your caretaker is because there will be no discussion after your loved one dies about what should have been done because they made the decision. And if you make the decision, people might say, well, you killed them, you kept them home, you should have taken them to the hospital. Who knew what, those things happen around a death. And then that just makes everything worse. The other thing you need to do is get all of your affairs in order, get your will in order, get everything put in a binder in a place a safe place where they can get it, your family can get to it right away. When I die, I have everything in a 3-ring binder, including the titles to my car, all my information about the house and the home. Every single thing they will need to manage my estate is in a 3-ring binder in one place and page protector so they can look through it and things aren't going to fall out. It's all organized. And when I die, they'll know I love them because I did all that work for them. It's not really actually it's not a lot of work. If you have the materials, you just stick them in that one place. It's not as much work as you think. And not only that, but I also recommend sending love letters to your family after they die. So they'll not only know I love them because they have that binder, but when they read through it, they'll read little letters from me telling them how much I love them. Just again to send that message of love and emotional support, even beyond the grave.
How is the planning of the will? Because I would find that very interesting because I have an older brother and we get along really good, but I feel like just like anything in the future there might be a discussion between like whatever my mom leaves us behind, and I think conflict always comes about when writing your will. Did you talk with your children beforehand, or did you do it on your own aside from them and they have not seen it?
No, it just depends on what you're comfortable with. In my case, I feel that speak now or forever hold your peace. Speak while I'm alive. It's better for me to take it, right? So when my husband, we wrote our will, and my husband was still alive, and both of our daughters are attorneys, so we sent the will to both of them and said, okay, look through this, and if there's anything you want to dispute, talk to us about it, because we want our greatest legacy is a relationship between my two daughters, and they love each other dearly, and they're very close. And I don't want to cause any trouble with that. So you look through it, if once you say it's okay to sign, forever hold your peace. You can't come back and complain. And what I also did is I took things like I have some jewelry that they might like, and so what I did is one day I took it all over to my one daughter's house, and I I had one person pick the first one, and then the other person pick the second piece, and the other person pick the third piece. They wrote it all down, attached to my will, so they know exactly what piece of jewelry they'll get. And eventually, I'll do it for my other things that they want. Now, the unfortunate thing for us older people is that the next generation typically doesn't want our stuff, and it's horrifying to us because we built our whole lives collecting this stuff so that you would have this wonderful stuff in your generation, and more and more and more and more the next generation is saying, we don't want your stuff, we don't really like the china, we don't like the things that were precious to us. So we have to get over that too. We have to realize that we raised grown adults who are independent and have their own lives, and they don't need our stuff. So we have to make plans for that. And in my will, we ask that the kids can go through and take whatever they want. And then I have a large extended family. They can come through and take whatever they want. And then there are companies around now that will come and dispose of your stuff, which is fabulous because many times a conflict occurs because one brother or sister lives close to the family and they're responsible for getting rid of all the stuff. And the other brother or sister is, 1,000 miles away and they don't have to do it. And there's resentment can build up, over these jobs. So in my case, go through, take what you want, and then this company, I'll put money aside for this company. They'll just come and clear it all out, and then you're all done. So I think making that easy for the next generation is important because again, my goal is to have a happy, close family when I die because the greatest predictor of happiness has been shown time and time and time again is not material wealth. It's a quality of your relationships. And I want my children and my grandchildren to be as happy as they can, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure their relationships are good when I go, that I'm not going to cause any problem with their relationships.
That's very funny. You mentioned the getting rid of a bunch of stuff. My mom's mentioned that before. How she said that when she's gone, she thinks like half her stuff is gonna go out in the trash because no one's gonna want it. And I was like, dang, that's kind of true. Like we'll just donate it because we don't like the taste. We don't have similar taste, and the times are gonna change. We're gonna leave, and that's very true. Uh, Going off of that, you provide services for end of life planning. How does that look for like a one-on-one consultation, or how does that planning go?
What I do is my partner, we're writing a book called Rethinking Death Life that's coming out in a couple months. And we're death doulas. And as a death doula, we help prepare people for death. My specialty, the area that I really work in, is developing a legacy plan. So I work with I coach people to help them get that legacy plan, get that binder in order. And I just coach them on it. Sometimes I have my book, Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For, has a step-by-step program. If you can follow the book and you're independent, you don't need anybody to help you. It's right there in the book. But there are people that just need someone to hold their hand and help them get through it. And I do that as a coach. I also coach widows through grief. As a widow, I know that now 80% of women die single, 75% of us become widows. So if you're a woman out there, chances are you're gonna die alone and you're gonna be single for a while. And that is very difficult when you lose your spouse. And so I really try to help widows find their purpose again because we're still here. We're not gone yet. So we're still here to find their purpose and to move forward in their lives with happiness and also less dependency on their children because many times as an older woman, as a 68-year-old, you got those two kids, I gave birth to them, I gave birth to them and I raised them and I took care of them. And, sometimes we have expectations of how they'll take care of us that might not be legitimate expectations. We just don't know how that's going to be. Everybody's a little bit different. And so we need to really find our own purpose. What is our purpose as an individual? We all have a purpose. We can love and we can find things to do to keep us busy. I think that's important. But we all have a purpose and we need to have that purpose. We need to feel that we are good enough alone. I'm good enough by myself. And yet, I'm the woman with two places. One place in Kansas City, I just instead of a house, I downsized to little tiny apartments in Kansas City and Minneapolis so I could be near my grandchildren, right? So I'm living that dream. But I realized too, one of the reasons I'm doing that is that gives I can be part of the lives of the grandchildren, but I'm not overbearing. I'm not there all the time. And if left to my own devices, I would be stalking every grandchildren every day. I'd be peeking through their school thing to see, are they doing okay in school? Are they being bullied? What's going on? That's what I really want to do because I just love them so much. I just want to make sure they're safe. That's what I want to do. I can't do that. That doesn't work. They'd have restraining orders against me if they allowed me to just go my own way. So I really learned how to set those boundaries. I go to their house when they call me. I don't show up unexpectedly. I don't have expectations of where I'm going to be on holidays because there are other in-laws to manage. And in doing so, what I found is by stepping back, I get invited to everything because I don't feel so needy. We have to kind of work on that in our stage. And I completely understand it because I'm there myself, but we need to step back. We need to just find our own purpose, feel good with ourselves and who we are, have friends our own age because we all get it. We talk about how nobody invites us to, Mother's Day anymore. We do that. We just do that amongst ourselves, and it's very freeing. We find that key because life can still be good even if you're older and even if we become frail. I have a new hip. I've got my medically speaking things are starting to fall apart, and it's a hard time of life. And so we need to really work even harder for that relationship happiness with other people and part of that with our children is keeping the boundaries that are there so that they're healthy boundaries.
How was it for that transition from working and school that like career driven mind to shifting more to a family oriented, especially nowadays. A lot of younger people are heavily focused on career, and I was too. And it made it difficult to focus on family and things that would be more fulfilling in life.
Well, for me, I was very fortunate because we owned our own business, my husband and I. And so I was done at 4. And I went to all 3 of the kids were in sports and plays and whatever activities they decided to be in. And we were at every one of them. So we were able to adjust our life, our practice life, because we owned our own business to make sure we were there as often as we could. And that was wonderful. When the grandchildren came, we did the same thing. We really tried to get to all of the games and all of the activities that they had. And I will tell you that that gave us so much happiness. And those are the memories that they carry with them. They don't really carry the memories of how hard I worked. On the other side, you do have to spend time building up your business, and that does take time. So I think that the key is finding that happy medium and that happy balance. And my husband and I kind of helped each other because if one of us couldn't make it, the other one was always there. So our kids always had somebody at their games and their programs. And my husband coached. He liked to coach, so that was his thing. He liked to do that. But I think when you're looking at your life, and now that I'm a death doula, I can tell you, I've not heard any reports of anyone saying that they wish they worked harder in their life. But lots of people wish they'd spent more time with their family, and those relationships are so precious.
How can someone go about like going through hardship? Like, let's say they had a rough like couple of years. How should they go about like, especially getting older into like their 30s, 40s, before it gets to a point where it's hard to like not recover, but make up for the lost time?
Well, the problem with getting older is it is hard because you don't I for me I need to get out and exercise more. I'm not as good as I should be. Part of that is because I have a lot of arthritis and I had to get a new hip, and so I use that as an excuse to not go. But whereas I should be going out and exercising and doing these things I should be doing to help the new hip, I kind of find excuses. So as you get old, aging is a difficult thing to begin with. It's just hard when you can't do the things you used to be able to do. So uh, try to stay as healthy as you can. Just do the best you can. And like I said, I'm not a guru in that, but just do the best you can. But also, I think that when you're overcoming grief, I think one of the things that affected me the most, and I lost a son to suicide. It was the worst time of my life. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't breathe. I was a zombie. It was a horrible thing. And one of my husband's cousins came up to me because I just was in the pit. I mean, I wanted to just get in my bed and stay there the rest of my life. I didn't want to get out. It's anyone who's been through that knows it's just horrible. And he came up to me one time and he was angry with me and he was waving his finger in my face and he said, "Don't you ever let your remaining children feel that they're not enough. Don't do that to them." And it hit me like a lightning bolt because he had lost his brother at about the same age as we lost our son. He'd been out drinking. His friends left him, thought they were doing him a favor and left him in his car in front of his house. But Minnesota gets a little cold in the winter and he froze to death in his car. It was terrible. And his parents were never the same. They couldn't overcome that grief. They couldn't get out of that pit. And he felt that because of the death of the son, his parents were so obsessed with the grieving the loss of the child they didn't have, they could no longer focus on the 2 children that they did have. And he told me that right as I was in the middle, I was in the, path of going right down that, taking that same journey, down into the pit. And it made me realize I had 2 daughters. Even though they were adults, they still needed me. And my husband he just had a liver transplant. He was sick. He needed me. And I realized that my grief wasn't just about me. It was about everybody around me. And I loved my daughters, I loved my husband, and I didn't want to contribute at all to their grief. So I fought, I kicked, I screamed, I got help, and found my way out of that grief pit. And it was one of the best things I ever did. So I think when you get down, when you go down, when you have those bad times, you need to fight your way out. It doesn't typically happen by itself. In fact, it'll overtake you quickly. It just eats you up. It'll eat you alive. and you have to fight it. You can't let that happen to you, not only for you, but for your family. And here I am, I'm 68 years old. It's been 15 years since my son died. And I'm like, and I'll never, you never get over these things. You work through it, you move forward. But I'm basically a joyful, happy person, and I'm able to show that to my grandchildren. I don't live with this shroud around me anymore. I did for many years, took a long time to get out of that, but I don't have that shroud around me anymore. So they get a grandmother that's in it with them, that's there for them, that has fun with them, and then ultimately it comes back on me. It's fun for me. So no matter where you are down in that pit, fight your way out. It's worth the battle, and it might take years. It took me years, but it's worth the battle to get out.
What are some things people can do like on a daily basis as like a routine or a habit to help recover from the grief to not stay stuck there and yeah, just be a bit better?
Well, certainly things like diet and exercise help. That always helps. But I think it's the mindset in the morning. What happens when, like, I wake up in the morning and still, even sometimes to this day, I wake up in the morning and it just, hits me. All this losses hit me. And when I get up, I just say, you know what? I am not going to let this consume me today. And I happen to be a Christian, so I get Satan in there. I'm not going to get out of here. You're not going to get me today. I mean, so I use my faith to kind of do that. But really, it's when you get up, if you get your mind focused on getting out of that pit and finding something else to give you joy, and realizing that that's a terrible place to be and that you don't deserve it, you need to get out. I think that's a first thing, because then you'll fight. It's the fight in the battle that really is the important thing. And get help. My mother and son took their own lives. I'm right in the middle. Depression's big in my family, so I treated for depression, and it works. I get treatment for that. My husband did not get treated for depression because he's kind of a strong Norwegian farm boy, right? They're tough, and it went to his heart. His heart checked out as very healthy right before my son died, because he had a liver transplant. They're not going to give you a liver if your heart's not good. So his heart was in good shape. And after my son died, his heart fell apart, and he had quadruple bypass surgery, a valve replaced, other heart surgeries. His heart just fell apart, and he eventually died from heart failure. So I really believe that the depression had a big role in that. And if you look at the studies, you'll see that depression and stress are tied to heart disease, cardiovascular disease, strokes, those types of things. So it's important for your physical health as well. And your generation is much better at seeking help. My generation tended not to do that very often. So go get some help. Get help for depression. If you find yourself in that pit and you can't get out, get some help. But fight, keep that battle up. Don't give in to it.
Yeah, especially nowadays, a lot of resources like therapy is more accessible and more accepting than before. And also, a lot of people are willing to take therapy even if it's like preemptively, like before they start noticing major impacts in their life. So I think that's pretty good for like the younger generation.
Absolutely.
And then going back to the end of life topic, how how do people like underestimate the cost of like medical expenses, other expenses that are related to like getting older and that end of life time frame?
Well, it's a pits because we spend a lot of time going to the doctor. We used to have time for social things, and now it's like, oh, I got a doctor's appointment that day, because you're taking care of one thing or the other. They do get high. There's a number of medications too, just to keep you alive. My husband was on a number of medications because he had a liver transplant, then his heart disease, and he was diabetic, and so there were so many medications that he was on that were very, very expensive. Also, I think that when you're talking about hospice, I'm a fan of hospice. I have written up my healthcare directive, and when I've been diagnosed as having a terminal disease, which means I'm going to die within so many months, usually it's 6 months. I plan to go into hospice, and hospice in the United States, if you have Medicare, it's covered. So those expenses are not there. They're kind of encouraging hospice. Now, some people do not want to go to hospice, and that is their right. I mean, people can choose. That's what I'm trying to say here. Let the person that's dying choose. Some people would prefer to be in a hospital, and that option should be available to them too. And but at the hospital, they do try to keep you alive as long as possible, and that might include intubation, might include CPR, those types of things. So you have to think about it. You have to think about what you want, and there's no judgment as to one way is right and one way is wrong. I think the judgment has to be in your heart with what you want, and your survivors will be grateful if they did what you want them to do. That's really critical.
And then, what are some overlooked decisions or documents that people overlook when providing like instructions to their children or loved ones that you see that, oh, they didn't think about this or they wish they would have done this earlier?
Yeah, in my book, I have a whole list of everything you need because there's it's fairly long. And it doesn't take that long to get them together. Things like the passwords. What are the passwords for your important uh, internet, your Gmail, your other things, your checking account, your savings account, those types of things. What is your what are your passwords? Those are very important. Who are the people that have, who's your doc, who's your attorney, who has the money, who's your financial planner? What are the numbers of your accounts so they don't have to try to track them down? You should have all the numbers of your retirement accounts, your checking accounts, all those things should be listed. And there are many, who takes care of the dog, right? You got a dog, who's going to take care of the dog? I don't have the animals. Well, I have some birds out there that are on my porch, but I don't have anything I'm taking care of. But who takes care of the dogs? Things like that that you might not think about. One other thing I really recommend is a letter of intent. And a letter of intent is something you put in. It's not a legal document. You write it yourself. It just goes in your binder, and it tells your family, it's kind of a letter to your family. It says, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. In my case is simple. I'm dividing it 50-50. I'm putting a little money aside for each grandchildren, the same amount, each of the grandchildren. And if many times you'll have something that's unusual. Say you have a member of the family that might have a developmental disability or something that requires additional resources for that person's life. You might put more money aside for that. Explain that in the letter of intent. Maybe somebody took care of you. Maybe one of your family members took care of you for the last 2 years, and you want to provide them with some additional funds to thank them for the time and effort they spent taking care of you in those last days, because typically a family member won't ask for money. Or if they did ask for money, it's usually better for them if they get the money as an inheritance, which has less tax than getting it if they paid you as an employee. So you may want to pay someone that has been taking care of you for the last few years. If you don't write it out in a letter of intent, that it's in your handwriting, so everyone can understand that you made this decision, it was a legitimate decision. What happens afterward, if a family member finds that one family member got more than they did, they start looking at some sort of a protest. Sometimes they'll get the lawyers involved. They'll say, "Wait a minute, that's not fair. I should have this." So a letter of intent will clearly document why you made the decisions that you made. The decisions you make are in the will, so that's the thing that holds firm. But why you made the decisions is very important for the people, for your family members to understand what your thinking was, and to prevent them from blaming other people for undue influence on you, because many times they'll think, well, she was around him all the time, she must have talked him into giving us all this money. But if you say, she worked for 2,000 hours for the last 2 years, I'd like to reward her in my will rather than just paying her, that's a lot more understandable if it's in your handwriting. Because once again, when conflict arises, people kind of assume the worst of everybody. And so if you have it in your handwriting so that everyone knows you made that decision and there was a reason behind it, you're going to prevent conflict after you die.
And going about that process, like there are families that like, for example, my mom doesn't speak English. How would I like really go about that process of explaining it to her, in the sense that to tell her that she should try to make it in her vision, and I would need to go through all this process and not be like a bias towards me for completing all this.
Well, one, if you have a brother, do you have any brothers or sisters? A brother?
Yeah, just one older brother.
So you have a brother. So this is the best thing when you're working on us old people. We want you to be happy and just say, Mom, I want to make sure that after you go, that we still have our strong relationship and there's not any controversy over what happens after you die. So could you sit down with us or maybe a third party? Sometimes having a neutral party
Mm.
is the best way to do it. And it might cost a little bit to get an attorney to fill that out for them, but it's far less than the money you'd spend trying to challenge anything, and certainly worth it for your relationship. So if you give her options like, well, let's go get this done with an attorney or with some sort of a worker that can help in your area if she doesn't speak English, find a way for her to get this all written down and perhaps have a meeting with you and your brother when you're both there with her. That might be helpful. Or she can, or so sometimes we feel like, well, this is my will. I'm going to write it the way I want to write it. That's her would be her choice. Have her write it all down and then share it with you first so that everybody knows what's going on. But I think if you plan it in a way, if you tell her of what the ultimate goal is that you and your brother live in peace after she's gone, that's an incentive to a mom to get that done. And if you frame it like that, that's a good incentive. Um, we don't like, we don't like to think that you're everyone's like waiting for us to die, right, to get our stuff, right? We don't want that to happen. So if you just talk about your relationship, how after you die, we want to make sure that our relationship is nice and strong and intact, and we need to have as much clarity as we can. So let's talk about this. I think that would be really helpful for your mom.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really good plan. Do you have any final words for our audience?
I think that, the clock is ticking. Death comes unexpectedly. The clock is ticking. The time to get ready is right now. Get your stuff ready now because you just never know what's going to happen. It's the best gift you can give to your family.
Wow. Thank you for coming on podcast. I hope our audience learned just as much as I did. I think it's a topic that isn't very discussed, especially out there in media or even in real life. And I'll have all your information in the description below. So if anyone is listening and is interested in learning more about Dr. Kimberly and the services she provide, or also just looking at what type of information is out there when it comes to our aging parents to make sure that they leave happily, that we are in a good position and not gonna fight after their death or anything like that.
Right. And you could just go to my website, drkimberlyharms.com, and find whatever you need on there. We have some free giveaways for how to have that discussion with your family. We have a 4-step guide that's free. So we've got lots of resources there for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.